coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
We're laughing about all this, and I found it all very hilarious, but there's a real tragic, silent story here, which it was told in the number of DMs I got from people who are actually suffering real world consequences. Kids who just busted their ass, worked so hard, massive APs, took on huge sports careers and all this stuff. And they just got literally shut out. And there's a sample of the DMs in my piece, but I got over 100 and I got emails from people who found my email on Substack. Just so many stories. And each one, I can't fact check any of them. Maybe they're all liars, Jamel, but that to me is the proof that, all this is creating is deep resentment on that side. And the other side isn't happy either because they feel like people think they got in for the wrong reasons or whatever. And we're creating a situation that doesn't feel tenable to me. And it just feels so toxic.
Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined today by a full crew. We've got publisher and president Ryan Williams. We've got editor James Poulos. We've got managing editor Seth Barron. And in this corner, we've got contributing editor Peachy Keenan. Especially excited. It's always nice when we have one of our contributing editors to join us. It's been a while since we talked to Peachy, and we have her on the occasion of her breaking the internet, which we're going to get into. Talk about that in just a bit. But first, let me lay the table here, as is my want this week. Sometimes, we sort of sit around and we think, what are we going to talk about? Sometimes the universe, God just hands us, a full suite of rich texts. And this was one of those weeks. It was a week designed for the hosts and the listeners of the Roundtable, because as you know, here on this show, although we do talk about the news, we particularly love to bring you a kind of a weirder, fresher take than perhaps you're hearing from all your other political podcasts, all the other talking heads out there. We like to peer under the hood and find out what's really going on, despite the ugliness that may entail. And so what I'm going to do, as I did last week, is I'm just going to mention a few different news stories that are going on. And in fact, I think we'll probably incorporate some of them into the conversation. But we wanted to spend some time with a few of the weirder features of online life. Our overarching theme today is fantasy meets reality online, a very Poulosian theme, if I do say so myself. But in the news, we mentioned last week Biden's visit to Ukraine, his sort of surprise visit. We also talked about the oral arguments over Section 230. So that's fair game to discuss, especially when it comes to fantasy and reality, what kind of propaganda is going on in the Ukraine war psyop, the Ukraine war experience, you might say, over here in America, Ukraine war TM. And then we've got also a new news item, something that's sort of been more lately discussed, and that is that the FBI director has come out and said that COVID was probably likely caused by a Chinese lab leak. I'm reading here from the Wall Street Journal, but this has been all over. Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said that the COVID pandemic was probably the result of a laboratory leak in China. Another interesting kind of question about what gets counted as real and what gets forbidden from being counted as real online, since if you are like me, you're old enough to remember when Lab Leak hypothesis was a dangerous conspiracy theory. It was probably racist, and it was certainly the kind of thing that only terrorists and extremists talked about in the dark reaches of the internet. If you read the book Viral, it's all about this, how kind of the narrative flipped, and when it became impossible to deny the lab leak hypothesis, or perhaps when it became more convenient to allow the lab leak hypothesis. We can get into all of that. But that's not going to be our immediate topic of conversation, because we want to jump into the Peachy Keenan tweet heard round the world. So, Peachy, you've got a book coming out. I'm going to start there, and I will explain why in a second. The book is called Domestic Extremist. It is available for pre-order on Amazon. And if you have not already pre-ordered, clicked pre-order, smash that pre-order button. What are you doing? Really, what are you spending your money on in this life, if not on Peachy Keenan's Domestic Extremist? You've also got a Substack, and this is why I'm talking about this, because it's the Extremely Domestic Substack, a great title. It's at peachykeenan.substack.com, and people can subscribe. There are various tiered levels of subscription. I will confess to you, Peachy, that I am a free subscriber to Extremely Domestic, although that will shortly change. Anyway, and the reason I'm raising this is because on Extremely Domestic, you will find a piece called The Race for College, which is a deep dive into Peachy's own experience going like double viral. I don't know how, maybe you can like coin a term for how this works, because usually like if you get a big tweet and it goes viral, it's like the people that are sort of in that space are retweeting you. The people that maybe share some of your priors, maybe think like, yeah, that's so well said, that's so right. Sometimes you also go like negative viral. You go viral for like something that people are hating on you about, rightly or wrongly. I went sort of mini hate viral once about the like characters on Lord of the new Lord of the Rings show, and the like so-called quote unquote race bent casting of that show. You went both kinds of viral at once, Peachy. And here's the offending, or the I don't know, the praiseworthy tweet. College admission season update from a friend. Quote, niece got 1450 SAT, 4.2 GPA, competitive athlete. She didn't even get into her safety schools, going to junior college this year, and is very depressed. The POC kids in her class, C students at best, are all headed to Berkeley, UCLA, USC, and Stanford. So this is an anecdote. This is a piece of, just a piece of information about the experience of one of your friends. It turned out, I guess, that this was actually from last year's admission season, not this year's, which is one of the things that people started freaking out about. But basically, it's a basically true story about how affirmative action and you might say the culture of affirmative action, rather than just the actual laws or policies, but just the recent vogue for judging people based on the color of their skin has started to have like very, very visible and obvious consequences to all with eyes to see. This drew a lot of attention. It also was it Jamel Bowie, Peachy, who first sort of like outed you to the world?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that great setup, Spencer. That's exactly what happened. Jamel Bowie did he did like basically a long debunking thread. Always appreciate the New York Times fact checking Twitter anons. That's hilarious to me.
If only they would fact check their own stories.
Right. Like what? You don't have a leg to stand on, dear. And then that led to Hannah Nicole Jones, our friend behind the 1619 Project, jumping on me with another multi-tweet thread. And then, just as you said, the tweet sort of exploded both ways. The haters went crazy, and my fans liked it. And I honestly, the best analogy for this was like, it's like the blue dress of tweets. Some people saw it as like very bad, like, racist, I'm a liar. And other people it really resonated with. And they were like, yep, that happened to my kid, that happened to me, that happened to my friend. And it just set off this crazy dynamic where I was getting like tons of like actual like hate DMs, and I got some death threats. But for every one of those, I got like 2 people who were like, thank you for being brave. Thank you for saying this. My numbers started to go crazy. I got all these new followers, and I had to block like 1,000 people. So it was definitely a hilarious, somewhat terrifying experience. and to become like the enemy of the day on Twitter when I'm like, just here I am home with my kids. It was really funny. It was hilarious.
Hey, Petrie, let me ask you. So here's what I don't get about this debate. Like, everyone understands that if you're that these colleges are using some version of affirmative action, they defend it and saying like, well, yeah, we are letting in. I mean, the numbers show it that they're letting in some people who, whose numbers are less qualified than others in order to, rectify his. What exactly is like Jamel Bowie and Hannah Nicole Jones? What's their argument? Are they saying, is it like really that's not happening and it's good that it is? Or are they saying, well, you don't understand what the purpose of this is? Are they really saying, no, all those people deserve to get in? It's not affirmative action. It's not quotas. Like, what is their argument?
Yeah, it's really interesting. They never address that. So the interesting about this tweet is that there are like the fact that through like basically a telephone game of like someone told my friend who texted it to me, the timing was wrong, right? So it wasn't right now talking about admissions this spring. It was actually, this happened to her last spring. This girl is currently at a junior college as a freshman. So when I realized that, I was like, oh no, because like, okay, like they did catch me in like a giant lie, how dare I? So that was the first thing. So it kind of gave them a little bit of a, there was like a chink in my armor where they could just now go, oh, well, that's false. So therefore this entire premise is totally false. They wanted to like basically discredit the whole idea that, some kids are getting into schools and others aren't based on like racial factors by calling me out as just like, well, she's just a total liar. Like I invented this. This is not happening. And so that they never addressed the actual, the bigger picture here. And then the hilarious thing is that I did get many people who retweeted it saying this isn't happening, but if it is, good. And I actually included one, like there's Mike Anton's celebration parallax in the wild, where this guy retweeted and said, not true, but if so, good. Yeah. It was just like incredible to see that too. Yeah. So they never really address or defend it because I think they can't, because the actual numbers like definitely back up that this is indeed happening.
That is a really interesting feature of all of this. Yeah. You mentioned the Mike Anton celebration parallax, which is that's not happening and it's good that it is. And yeah, I mean, there is this way in which it becomes sort of impossible to like the kind of the point of the form of discourse is to pile on so entirely that like it becomes impossible to actually address the thing that the original tweet was about. Like, because that thing where sometimes tweets go viral and like people don't follow you, they just retweet the stuff. And then sometimes if it goes viral and they follow you, it's like you've really hit a nerve, or like there's people that are just sort of out there thinking this, but like unable to acknowledge or talk about it. And it feels like a lot of this is sort of designed when they find some like minor factual error that you made. And then it turns out, but the factual error, what I like about this is like the factual error is literally of no consequence to the
right,
point
exactly.
It actually does not matter at all. And yet then, as you say, like they raise this and therefore the whole thing is illegitimate. The whole thing is made up. And I feel like that is designed to create for people the impression that like, this is something that you may not discuss. Like we will literally destroy the conditions under which you might talk meaningfully about this issue.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like when, some people used to say that Donald Trump would put like a misspelled word in one of his tweets so that everyone would go, look at this idiot, look at this. And so it's almost like maybe the secret to going viral is insert an inconsequential error into every tweet. Yeah, and you will go crazy.
I also, this kind of thing, it seems to have the practice anyway, and thus the obvious results, that is the practice of aggressive affirmative action, and the results has kind of been supercharged since the summer of Floyd. So, and I found reading the whole thread funny and perplexing at the same time, Peachy, because I mean, this is just common knowledge to those who follow what's been going on in higher ed, especially in the last few years. I mean, the anecdotes at a certain point do become anecdata, I was talking to someone who knows Stanford quite well, and just given the stats, I think it's 22% white student body now, down probably 10 or 12 or 13 points from say 10 years ago. If anyone who knows the group differences in academic aptitude as revealed through SAT scores and all the rest, of course it's true that most or a lot of the persons of color go to these schools are C students, and that they have a leg up on the white kids, especially the straight white kids. I remember the study, can't remember if it was at Bowdoin or Williams, but our Claremont's chairman was dipping into this stuff, and he's an alum of Williams and commissioned a study on Bowdoin. But if you look especially at the hardest schools hit, in a way, start at the bottom half of the top tier, and then the top part of the second tier, because the big Ivies get their, especially Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and even Stanford, get the kind of pick of the minority students from across the country and even globally. So I think the disparities will be less. But if you go just one rung down, the average SAT scores for entering students, if you go black versus white, it's at least a standard deviation. If it's a 200 SAT points, for example. So what you're reporting is as an anecdote from your friend that the internet then got shocked about and was denying up, down, right, left, and center has been kind of common knowledge amongst people who pay attention to admissions and the trend of affirmative action admissions for the last few decades.
Right. That's the funny thing about it, is that you're required to accept that it's happening, celebrate that it's happening, and yet also simultaneously never speak about it and deny that it's happening. And at the same time.
Yeah. And also inveigh against the possibility that it would stop. You're supposed to be really angry that courts want to end affirmative action at the same time that you're saying, oh, well, it doesn't really make an effect. I thought it was interesting, this woman, Elizabeth Spears.
Oh, yeah, I saw her.
I guess used to work for Gawker, and now she's some kind of lefty jurist. But she had this thing, she's like, why do people assume that if 22% of the class at Stanford is white, that they don't actually, that's merit-based? She's like, in my experience, black women tend to be the smartest and hardest working and highest achieving people across the board. So this is just a question of pure merit. But then it's well, if that's really the case, then why would you? Every other domain, they're disproportionately underrepresented. So what was she saying? And then she got into it with Steve Saylor, who was saying oh, well, you should start a company and a software company and only hire black women engineers. And you'll make $1 billion because you can pay them so little because they're so underpaid compared to everybody else. And she was like, absolutely, that would be a great idea. Someone needs to fund that. And people just kept saying, yeah, do it. And she's like, write me a check. It was very silly.
Yeah, just to add one more thing. We're laughing about all this, and I found it all very hilarious, but there's a real tragic, silent story here, which it was told in the number of DMs I got from people who are actually suffering real world consequences. Kids who just busted their ass, worked so hard, massive APs, took on huge sports careers and all this stuff. And they just got literally shut out. And there's a sample of the DMs in my piece, but I got over 100 and multiple. I got emails from people who found my email on Substack. Just so many stories. And each one, I can't fact check any of them. Maybe they're all liars, Jamel, but that to me is the proof that, all this is creating is deep resentment on that side. And the other side isn't happy either, because they feel people think they got in for the wrong reasons or whatever. And we're creating a situation that doesn't feel tenable to me. And it just feels so toxic.
Yes, but on a certain level, this is salutary. Look, it's unfortunate for kids who go through, who, like you say, did all this hard work. But, we're always talking about how 4-year elite education, higher education in this country is a massive scam. It's essentially like just run by, like 98% of it is run by these commissars, that it's not worth that you're just pouring money into this like administrative bloat. So, from the perspective of delegitimizing this like horrible institution, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe like going to one of these schools will become like the equivalent of, I don't know, like owning like a 96-inch television, or just some kind of like absurd luxury item that isn't worth the cost. I mean, I don't want to be glib, but this is what happens when you have like, credential inflation. Eventually the bubble bursts.
Right. Silver lining is that all those kids are getting red pilled in real time.
So my question is, Peachy, like, what do you do for an encore? Like, what is the next?
Oh no.
What is the next
I don't know.
step toward complete meltdown? What is the factoid? What is the anecdote that is really going to send people over?
Well, I'm hoping that, my imminent book launch, which coincidentally or not comes out on D-Day, causes a similar meltdown. So I'm hoping that I get, Amazon melts down. Like that would be great for me. No, I don't know. I mean, I've told my friend, like, please never text me again, because this is like so much heat. So I have to think about that one, James. I'll try, how do you top this? I don't know. I'm not getting arrested. I don't know.
Okay, so the piece is called The Race for College, excuse me. It's on Peachy Keenan's Extremely Domestic. You can find the tweet there and follow Peachy. This really is the definition of that GIF where Michael Jackson is eating popcorn that people sometimes put in the replies. Like, you can scroll forever on this one. As Ryan,
my quick question, Spencer, I just throw it out for the group for very brief discussion. Maybe is, Jamel Bowie's response, like about UVA. He said like, well, this is all made up because that sort of GPA and et cetera would get you into UVA out of state. And then someone replies below, I basically had that and I didn't get into UVA. I wonder how much of the sort of punditry ruling class, especially the ones that have a vested interest in saying that affirmative action is really just redressing past injustices rather than perpetrating a new kind of racial set-aside program. I just wonder how many of them believe their own press releases on this. I think Jamel might, but I'm just struck by how much. I suspect that a big portion of elite America out there who have a vested interest in believing that affirmative action is really just helping a few folks at the margins, really just believe that this isn't that what is happening is not actually happening. That is to say, we now have had at least 30 years, and now in the last few years, much accelerated, just swathes of people who really should not be at any of these elite institutions getting in because of the color of their skin or their narrative about their sexual identity. I wonder when that bubble's going to burst.
Yeah, I mean, can we ever know the minds of others? Like, this is a sort of inevitable uncertainty that does sort of set in. I mean, it's akin to the evil or just stupid question, which one sometimes raises in, like, when the COVID pandemic was causing people to like enter full authoritarian mode. Was it that they really believed the whole narrative about how this was like bubonic plague part 2, or was it sort of a little bit more like sinister in some way? And I feel like the cognitive dissonance on this and the like refusal to engage with with the actual text, like with the actual content of what Peachy was basically saying, that sort of stuff does bespeak a certain kind of denialism to me. Like that suggests, and to be like as fair as humanly possible, like we all have this reaction to a certain extent when we encounter arguments or facts that we don't want to see or incorporate. Like, many of us have a kind of reflexive defense mechanism, right? That sort of says, well, they were wrong about this thing, or there's some small defect here. And so However, we also, I think, can credit ourselves that we try to like think around that and be like, okay, well, I do actually have to grapple with this, and maybe I disagree with this speaker, but I have to acknowledge the kind of basic facts that they're saying. And I just feel like one of the things that we were seeing in this like online maelstrom, like one of the dynamics was just the kind of unleashed, unchecked indulgence of that defense mechanism where people were just full bore like, no, it's not happening because of all these other things, and there was kind of there wasn't that like self-awareness or check on it. Like that was kind of my read, but that's definitely psychoanalyzing our opponents. So what do I know?
Yeah, it's funny. I got one message that I didn't put into the Substack that was like a very lewd, graphic, sexual hate DM telling me to like kill myself and using all this profanity. And I did share it with a few friends. I shared it with our friend Mary Harrington, and my joke was like, they're not sending their best. And her reply was great. It was like, no, PG, they are sending their best. This is their best, which I thought was perfect.
Oh man, that's like that New Yorker piece that people have also been sharing that people can't like, let alone diagram a sentence. They can't like identify the subject and the verb of a sentence in college. I mean, this is kind of in a more sobering way, of course, this is a consequence of the many years of sort of like lowering standards in education. It is not to actually help people that could be benefited by a good education, but rather to just like sink a lowering tide sinks all boats. Like it just creates this situation where people are drowning at schools that they shouldn't have gotten into, or where when they would have been very well served by an education elsewhere. And it sort of contributes to the just endless lowering of educational standards that makes it impossible even to like get a sentence out. There's another viral tweet. Now, this is just like the viral tweets episode of the Roundtable, but there's another one going around of this poor girl who, but I mean, not that her race particularly matters, but she seems white so far as I can tell. And she's trying on a podcast to articulate what I gather is like a phenomenon where there's really no commitment. Like men aren't really into commitment in younger people's relationships. But she does not have really like easy use of the English language, like, and it seems to be her only language. And it's incredibly heartbreaking because she's saying something absolutely true and identifying a very real problem, but just nobody ever taught her to form a sentence. And like, I'm sure there's like a lot of people out there. It's like such a terrible disservice to deprive someone of like command over the English language. Like it's heartbreaking.
Is this the thing where like the girl's saying, I'm just so annoyed about stages?
Yes, stages, talking stages.
Yeah. It was very disconcerting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's dunking on her, but it's not. She is like a victim of the system. Speaking of victims of the system, actually, it's good, PG, that we have you with us for this next topic as well, because I feel like this is kind of in your wheelhouse, which by the way is not usually college admissions. This is not like your main topic of it's not your main beat. This kind of is, and it's also a beat for a lot of us. Ryan slacked us this series of threads. It's an account that I had never seen before. Memo Acton at Memo TV is where you can find him, and these tweets are pretty high at the top of his feed at the moment, so it's pretty easy to encounter. There's a filter on TikTok which uses what seems to be just the latest in AR and AI, advanced sort of artificial intelligence and also augmented reality to make you look younger. Specifically, it's a teenage filter I discovered when I, full disclosure, went onto TikTok so that I could try this filter out. It's supposed to make you look like your teenage self. These filters have been around for a long time on like Instagram and TikTok and whatever, but this is definitely a step up in the tech. I mean, it's got a lot of incredibly remarkable attributes, one of which is that like if you cover your face, it knows you're covering your face, so it doesn't like filter over your hand. It seems to sort of, some of them seem to restructure the face as well. I went on and did one, and it made my beard like scragglier in the way that a teenage boy's beard often is, which was kind of remarkable. It looked a lot like my beard looked in high school. So this is like a really advanced filter, and people have been using it. We can get into like what age these people seem specifically to be, but it seems like kind of 50 somethings, and also like elder millennials who I think are in the like 40-ish range using this filter, having meltdowns. I mean, most of the people in this thread who are having the real meltdowns are women. Some, you do see some men as well having meltdowns, but there's sort of like, I'll sort of lay this out a little bit and then we'll just get into it. You can disagree with me if you like, but I think there's sort of two versions of the meltdown. At least one is like, where did my life go? Where did my youth go? I didn't realize how old I had gotten, how old I look. The other is like, I wish that I could talk to this person. I mean, maybe this is like just a variant of the same thing, but like, I wish that I could reach out to my younger self and tell him it's going to be okay. Or like that time in my life was actually very turbulent and I want to reassure this person. Talk about a rich text. I mean, there's just so much to get into here. The reason that I went on TikTok and did it myself is I wanted to see if there was some kind of like visceral emotional power to the experience that I was not really understanding. I didn't want to get on here and like accuse all these people of like living their lives wrong, and then myself find out that actually I too like dissolved into weeping when I saw my younger self. I did not. It was not particularly disheartening to me. Seth told me, he was like, that's because you're like basically 12 years old anyway. But I do sort of feel as if there's a very specific kind of life here that is being grappled with. And it is at the very least a life like lived without real consciousness of death, like the passage of time and mortality, the culture of kind of eternal youth. This filter is weirdly, despite the fact that it is a fantasy filter, it's weirdly forcing people to confront the reality of their mortality. I don't know. What did you guys make of all of this? Let's. I open the floor to hot takes.
It was. I don't know. It maybe caught me at a certain point in my day that it was just so revealing to me of so many themes from our postmodern life. Just to run through sort of the gamut, trying to understand where their lives went. That's how somebody was commenting on this. It's quite emotional, y'all. There's a lot of disproportionate amount. You mentioned this already, Spencer. 55-something ladies crying over their lost youth. The perfect one was the blue-haired old Gen Xer, and then then she has her teenage face, and she says, "I miss that face." But of course, her blue hair like has no business being on her old Gen X self. It really should be on the teenager. I just thought that was a poignant mix. I was pretty when I was younger. I was mean to her. I didn't treat her right. These are all different. There's so much I want to tell that person. Spencer's kind of covered some of this. I miss who I was before life happened. I miss you. Come back. I didn't realize how triggering this would be. Of course, the first normal-ish reaction, we shouldn't be surprised, looks to be like a middle-aged Gen Xer, meaning mid of Gen X, with her like 12 to 13-year-old daughter, and they're just having fun and making faces at it. Perfectly normal. I feel like that girl, but I look like that girl. That was one of the sort of, I think, late 50s Gen Xers. Children telling their 30 to 40 something or mothers that the younger one looks better. So that's a wonderful like TikTok generation thing, like, "Mom, you look old." And that's actually what children normally do for us, is to put in perspective our lost youth and the fact that we have responsibilities and our adults. This seems to have skipped some of these people on this. And then like it runs the gamut. It shows the complete neutrality of technology. And I think I'm repeating what I read from people who are at the cutting edge of watching all this develop. That is this accelerating revolution in AI and augmented reality and all the rest, that basically that all of them are saying, both maximalists and skeptics are saying, the next year is going to be wild, like just get ready. But some people are traumatized by the fact that they seem to have a youth trauma that they either want to tell the young self, like, you'll get through it, it'll be fine, don't despair. Like, obviously they were despairing as they looked back on their childhood, they were despaired when they're in their teenage years. And then also, so there's that. And then there's another lady who's like, my trauma from being bullied for being ugly in high school is like totally lifted and she's about, I think, late 30s maybe at most. Because she's like, look at the teenage me. She was beautiful. Like I released my trauma from being made fun of as a child. Clearly they were all idiots. So I thought that was pretty revealing. And then finally, maybe the most, well, not finally, but the most proper response is probably the last lady, who's clearly like from the South and just is laughing hysterically at this technology, which is pretty good. Oh, the other side of therapy was somebody who was like, look, you can just use this and talk to your younger self and release all that trauma that way. Have a dialogue with your younger self. And then finally, perfect for our time, and I thought in a way the most disturbing but also revealing, was the female to male trans person who looked to be maybe 30, who had reports, he quote unquote had transitioned in his 20s. So he's like, I'm looking at a face I've never seen. Is this what I would have looked like as a boy had I gotten puberty blockers when I was a teen? And it was clearly sort of reflecting on it and distraught by it, and sort of still very much this technology is just further putting him or her in the grip of the identity mental health crisis that they've been clearly going through for years. So there's just so much in the thread, and it really made an impression on me about our times.
Yeah, it's right now sensory overload is typically associated with having just kind of a comprehensive orgasm of your inputs, and people are starting to realize that actually maybe being overwhelmed by something artificial or automated might actually be like a shattering experience rather than just a kind of something that makes you soy face and pass the time that way. This is not, this used to be sort of common knowledge that life is a precious gift that is fleeting and the things of this world do not endure, and contemplating this, orients the spirit toward things that are both invisible and eternal. And, that's a lesson that seems to be in need of relearning for many people. But caught up in that lesson is if you go searching in these simulations for some kind of evidence that there is a self-sustaining rational order to the physical world, you might be shocked to discover what you find lurking underneath. People who think, well, this is just math ultimately, and math is internally consistent, and we can just create a sort of rationally structured parallel universe and go into that and everything will be fine. Not really. It's the early indications underscore what quantum physics and some other things going on with the telescope and the galaxies being where science would say they're not supposed to be. It's much more overwhelming and much more mysterious than what we might like to believe if we are seeking to be comfortably at home in this world or in any of the subworlds that we seem bent on creating.
To me, it's amazing, and it really indicates that the great Gen X midlife crisis is upon us. And it's just amazing to watch that play out in different ways online and in real life. But what I would love to know is, I haven't used this filter yet, by the way. I'm the last person in the world who's never used a TikTok filter. Okay. I would be curious to know that the women who are sort of, late 40s, early 50s, who are really breaking down, I would like to see a chart that shows me how many children they have, because I feel like the ones who probably have no or fewer children are probably getting hit the hardest here. That's just my, Freudian analysis, because I just feel like women who feel kind of have a bunch of kids or have their families and feel kind of pretty good about, well, okay, I didn't become a millionaire, I didn't become a CEO, but look at this, I have this little family and we're doing okay. I feel like they would be they're okay with their age, and they look at their teenage self and they're probably like, look at that idiot. Yes, I had smooth cheeks and, no double chin or whatever, but I did a lot and I'm okay. So I'm just curious to know, what if fertility or lack thereof is playing out here. And the other thing I thought about was, Spencer, something I wrote in my response to your book feature on The American Mind about age dysphoria. I've never had gender dysphoria, but yes, I have age dysphoria, absolutely. And I am kind of living that TikTok filter in real time in slow-mo. And it really does feel like once you hit your 40s as a woman, one day you look in the mirror and you're like, holy crap. Like what? Wait, what? And that's real, and you just kind of shrug and go on with your day, and you don't like obsess, hopefully, and you don't aspire to look like Madonna looks, but it is a real thing. And I pray for those women. I really do.
I like that age dysphoria. Yeah, my sense of humor often identifies as a 12-year-old, and my sense of physical prowess often identifies as a 19-year-old. And then, reality comes back to life as you throw your back out reaching, for the soap in the morning.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
that was
it's real.
that was a really good piece, PG. And like I think we definitely all in some level have that experience. I mean, maybe you're identifying like particular like women of a certain age, like have it intensely. But one of the things you said in that piece is like, guess what? We are all basically trapped in quote unquote the wrong body, in the sense that like the fall of man has created this situation in which our flesh decays and eventually dies. And like we have a very powerful felt sense that that is not supposed to happen. And I think that, I mean, the point of the piece was to talk about transhumanism, but I also think that helps illuminate Ryan's observation about the trans person. I forget which direction you said the person went,
Male
Ryan, but male to female. Okay. So like that, right. Like everybody has a sense that there's, gotcha. Okay. Female to male. Okay. So, I mean, everybody has a sense that they are like, that he or she is somehow alienated from his or her body, that like the soul and the body are in this difficult, complex relationship. And that is why the trans extremist situation is not at all limited to gender. It is in fact much more close to the impulse that would make you like want to live in the avatar world, in the world of like where you can just edit everything about yourself all the time. And yeah, I mean, I feel like that is one of the things that these features or that these filters are doing, is they're like forcing us up against this problem. And as James is sort of saying, like some people are starting to catch wise to the fact that that might not be the blissful ascent into post-human perfection that has been advertised. It might actually be extreme. I definitely think kids are a big part of this, or at least like family, like people. Yeah, if people feel as if they've kind of integrated into society, they will, and have had kids and have had like a productive legacy in life. They're not thrilled to get old, but they are a little bit more like at peace with just the basic facts about humanity.
I mean, maybe, I don't know. I think I'm older than everybody else on this podcast. And I'll tell you, there's the indignant, I don't care how many kids you have. I don't care how integrated into society and everything you are, the indignity of age, whatever. It's just it's brutal. Did you ever read Visit from the Goon Squad? I mean, that's kind of like, that's what the Goon Squad is supposed to be. Time, like coming and beating the crap out of you. I just want to say, anybody who's worried about it, go look up a picture of Newt Rockney on Google, because, okay, this guy died, he was 42. But I swear to God, you would think he's like in his 60s or something. I mean, I think people didn't really expect necessarily to get old back then the way they do now. And I think as a result of that, they didn't expect to look young their whole lives. And of course, they smoked and drank, and just life was harder in like the 20s or whatever. Look up Newt Rockney. It's a very interesting. It's just an interesting experiment, and consider that he was in his 30s in most of these pictures.
No, and true trauma or stress can age you. I mean, you read some of the accounts of spouses or betrothed or siblings of people men that came back from the Great War or World War II, and they come back at 28 or 31, and they look like they've aged 30 years in their deployment. So that's also a thing too. I think maybe as a society, we are just less familiar with younger people that look old because they've been through a lot. Because there's also the last interesting thing about all this is it's all on TikTok. So it's all performative in a way already. And so,
yeah, that is. I'm glad you mentioned that because once people started, I mean, I'm sure that many of these reactions were sincere, but you could also tell that it was like, okay, there's like a Pavlovian thing where you're supposed to cry when you see this video. Yeah, exactly.
About my lost youth. I thought it was hilarious too. I mentioned it when I originally flagged this. Some of the sort of ancillary commenters on Twitter, like, look at all these crazy Gen Xers freaking out. And I'm like, half the people I see on here are millennials. They're not Gen X. Like, do you know the age range for Gen X? Like, Seth and Peachy are Gen X. I'm like right on the cusp. Spencer is solidly millennial. Yeah, exactly.
James. This also falls into like the category of the women who are of social media stars, the young influencers who are like 20, 21, and they already look like they're on that filter permanently, but in real life, because they admit to lip fillers and facelifts and Botox and breast augmentation and all those things. They've already done that, but like in college.
Let alone all the light augmented reality touch-ups that they have on their pictures on Instagram and all the rest, layered on top of their regimen of enhancements.
This is like a bit of a side curmudgeon bit, but like it's like you almost have to tell some of these apps not to do that at this point. Like sometimes on Skype or whatever, it's like it automatically touches up your face, which is like, I take that as a personal insult. Like, excuse me, but no, I mean, like Seth, your point is well taken. Like I know that I sort of don't really have authority to speak about how I will feel when I actually get older. I definitely feel like, I mean, that is. Peachy, that's kind of your point, right? That nobody likes this. Like it actually does really hit you hard at a certain point. And what that would suggest to me is like you're going to need something in that moment to like at least fall back. Like even if it's not going to be fun, maybe it will fit somehow within a context of like a spiritual belief about the world or something that will just tell you like this is part of life rather than this like shock that nobody prepared you for. I mean, in that capacity, it reminds me of that like infamous article about the woman who froze her eggs, but then none of them came to term, and she just like, had this just utter meltdown because like nobody had really sort of accurately prepared her for the situation that this is not just eternal youth. Like people don't tell anyone these things anymore, so they get surprised on top of everything else.
I think of Macbeth and that moment in the play where he gives up and says, well, I've already made it sort of halfway into this ocean of blood. Probably I should just go all the way. As in, you've reached a point already where you're so profoundly disconnected from anything that would feel like a return to normal or a return to home or a return to wholeness, that you are inclined to just, accept that there is no endpoint to this process other than giving yourself over to the process completely. And if there's a Lady Macbeth in the equation, that's all the more so. And if there's a coven of witches in the equation that have succeeded in, hacking your brain, quote unquote, then all the more so. And so as much as people are, I think, naturally or wisely alarmed at the prospect of machines that are so recursive and so self-referential that they automate themselves quickly, iterate themselves quickly into a configuration that just overwhelms us because we can't even process what is unfolding around us. At the end of the day, it is really ourselves and the insanity that we can arouse within ourselves once we go too far, once we disconnect too far, that we should really be worried about.
I am in blood stepped in so far that to return would be as tedious as to go o'er. Last week I made Seth recite poetry, so this time I've pulled that out of. I did not look it up, and I probably got things wrong. Okay, it was just as sort of interesting and weird and fun as I expected it to be. We have a weekly segment now where we tell people to read the damn site by picking a piece that we like and mentioning it. PT, if you'll stick around for this, I did not warn you about this, so maybe you don't have anything particularly top of mind, but if you do, please feel free to jump in. I will start as is my wont. I can't believe I have to say the title of this piece on air, but I guess
I know which one that is.
Yeah, the things we do for art. And I don't even totally know how to pronounce either the title or the name of the author, but I'm just going to say it. You really should go read the piece, Click This Linkassi, which I think that's how it's pronounced only because in Lizzo's song, she talks about feeling fussy walking in my Balenciagas. So I think that's how you pronounce it. And it is about the new trend, which is a real thing, of adding fussy to everything, is in reference to the female genitalia. And it's about how that linguistic gesture is a kind of perfect encapsulation of what Mary Harrington might call meat Lego Gnosticism, this just, profound, this effort to totally dissociate every part of our body from every other so that it can become a kind of market commodity. It's a sharp piece. It's a funny piece. It's one of those ones that just picks something very specific and goes a really short piece about just like its pretty profound significance. So one more time, and then, dear God, hopefully never again. Click This Linkassi by Grayson Quay, I think is how you say his last name.
I can go now. Is that good? I would say,
please, yeah,
that I enjoyed a piece by our friend August Mayrot. He wrote a piece for us called "The Time to Find Your Spouse Is Now," and it's basically saying that we should not. This is a common theme around here, but that we shouldn't encourage young people, even like high school, college, to see marriage and family as something that they need to put off for 10 or 15 years. That really, especially because all of the social structures, it's a lot easier to meet people when you're young. I will say we did get an angry letter because the art that we chose to illustrate this piece with shows an interracial couple, and someone wanted to know why we did that. And I would say that at TAM, we are utterly colorblind, and the fact that it's an interracial couple doesn't really mean anything. And we encourage people of all races to marry one another if they are in love. And that's our answer to that person. But I think it was a very good piece, and I suggest everyone read it.
I should jolly well say so. What a
I should say, by way of introducing my site rec today, that I do have something of a prejudice, a bias, perhaps even a fear directed against purple hominids, having been traumatized by the Marvel movies. Thanos, obviously, just a very awful purple humanoid, and now I just can't help but sort of flinch when I think about seeing one in the wild. Which brings us to Captain Kami, which is a piece that went up very recently, in fact, maybe even today, by John McLean. And this subhead is the Marvel Studios Propaganda Mill Switches teams. First half of the piece concerns the fascinating relationship that Marvel had with the Pentagon, beginning with Iron Man, and now Marvel, being a subsidiary of, yes, the Walt Disney Company, is back into China. Bob Iger returned as CEO, and with his return, China has allowed Disney to return in the country in a new way. There's, I'm sure anyone listening to this, the wheels are already turning in their mind as to exactly why that is not so great. But you can imagine sort of messing around with like one of the many automated computer assistant art generators and sort of typing in as your prompt, like America and China combine into a single thing. And Disney's role in this, in sort of, not just making America more Chinese, but making China more America, that's something that I think demands further consideration, careful consideration, especially in light of its, I think Ron DeSantis has an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that's been making the rounds why I stood up to Disney. And you reflect on these things, the way that Disney has become in its way an automated simulator used to re-engineer children's souls. That's the business they're in, and that's reason enough to stand up to Disney. So the piece, Captain Kami, the author John McLean.
I was disappointed to read that piece because I was so looking forward to going to Ant-Man Quantumania. The only thing holding me back, of course, this is the thing. It's like if you sell your soul to Marvel, you don't even get good content in return.
I hear also that I have not confirmed this. It's not immediately apparent from the preview, but the new Ant-Man movie, it's poor Paul Rudd has been kind of sidelined. It's really more about the Wasp because she's a woman. So it's just another sign of the decline of Marvel. The China thing is interesting, and the Chinese market. I wonder if this calculus will shift at all as India has now eclipsed, many think, China's population. Perhaps the future of a more wholesome and regenerated Hollywood is some Hollywood Bollywood hybrid. It's certainly a lot more filled with joy that is Bollywood than I would think anything in China. Anyway, my choice is it's fitting because it kind of addresses some issues that we brought up in the discussion of Peachy's viral tweet about affirmative action. But I also want to use it as a way of illustrating the interesting folks we bring into our orbit and promote, and who then become colleagues at Claremont. And it's Prescription for Disaster by Jeremy Carl. The subhead is we can have reparations or we can have a functioning multi-ethnic democracy. For those of you familiar with Jeremy at our website, I would encourage you to check out his stuff. Check him out also at American Greatness. Jeremy's beat these days is kind of multiculturalism, identity politics, and its intersection with our corrupt, sort of increasingly racialized republicanism in America that is small r. And, Jeremy, for a long time, just out of necessity, really, and just academic interest, wrote on energy policy at the Hoover Institution for many years. And Jeremy's interesting. He was involved in Web 1.0 in Silicon Valley and made some money doing that in the early years back in the 90s. And now that has afforded him and his family the freedom to move into the Mountain West. And Jeremy writes all sorts of interesting things. He also served a brief stint as an assistant secretary for the Interior, I think in charge of monuments and parks, maybe, or something like that in the Trump administration for the final year anyway. Anyway, Jeremy's he has a PhD, kind of recovering academic type, but Jeremy's one of the many interesting authors we have at the American Mind, and he's also a Washington Fellow of ours, the Center for the American Way of Life. So it's the nice intersection of stuff that we talk about and are interested in the scholarship about it, and allows us to attract and become friends with folks who may have admired us from afar. Jeremy, when he came to us, wanted to write more about immigration, nationalism, populism, identity politics, multiculturalism, and all this stuff. And, Hoover wasn't really the right place to do that. So it was a happy meeting of the minds, and he's been a great colleague of all of ours for years now.
May I jump in with my pick? Or
please do. Yes,
okay.
You are invited.
I love all those picks. I'm a little behind, but I'm definitely looking forward to the Captain Kami. This one really stood out to me. It's actually technically not from the last week. I apologize. Do You Even Read Bro by Raw Egg Nationalist. Maybe you guys talked about this. In a degenerate society, physical culture is revolutionary. So this was his response, right, to the Adam Ellwinger kind of, diss on right-wing bodybuilders. But I just want to applaud the American Mind for allowing the discourse, the right-wing bodybuilder discourse, to thrive, to blossom on both sides. I just love it. As Spencer knows, I'm the mother of a proto right-wing bodybuilder.
An RWBB TB, a right-wing bodybuilder 2B. Yes.
Yes, he's actually a gold medal power lifter for his class at the moment. And I've just seen this kid, really just gain so much. I'm not just gains with a Z, but gain in confidence and just, watching him, it did make him kind of blossom. So I just applaud you guys for publishing Ren and this piece. I think it's a great debate to be having.
Oh, that's awesome. I loved that piece too. And Peachy, you and I are obviously on the exact same wavelength because last week my pick was those two pieces put together.
Okay.
I was proud of us for having that up there, and extremely proud of your young king, as I think we say, for getting that gold. That's pretty awesome.
Pretty good.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I think that's all of us. This has been another raucous and entertaining chat with my friends. I was thinking about the roundtable. It's like, I'm going to log on and have a call with my friends. But we have a lot of friends out there, and we want to thank you all for listening to the roundtable. If you would like to know more about what we do at Claremont or at the American Mind specifically, you can visit our many, many websites at claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, AmericanMind.org. And if you'd like to donate to support us, we would be only too happy to accept your support. We rely on the support of donors like you. So go to Claremont.org/donate and mention in the notes if you would like to be shouted out on an episode of the Roundtable. A lot of our fans and friends like to remain anonymous, and we stan and support that. We stan a pseudonymous or anonymous king or queen. However, if you would like to be known and trumpeted throughout the heavens, that is also an option to you, should you like to donate for in support of the show. Thank you, as always, to our production and engineering crew. It's Logan Zeppieri behind the producer's window today. One more time, Peachy's book is called Domestic Extremist, and I guess it drops on D-Day, which is better than a bomb dropping on D-Day. So go check that out, Domestic Extremist. And we will, don't forget, one more thing. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. At the very least, keep your bad opinions to yourself. But if you have a rave review to write for us, that really, really helps to grow the show. So do that. Thank you very much for listening. We will talk to you all next week.